Good afternoon from London, everybody. Our webinar will begin very shortly. We'll just take a few moments while we wait for people to join the call. Hey, good afternoon from London, but I know we have people joining us from lots of different countries today, so it might be good morning, it might be good evening even, wherever you are joining us from. It's wonderful to have you with us here today for our conversation, which is going to be all about the identity opportunity, it's called, how digital IDs can help to unlock government service transformation. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former civil servant from here in the United Kingdom, and I'm delighted to be chairing this conversation today on behalf of Global Government Forum, which works with civil servants and public servants all around the world. And also, I'd like to say a big thanks to our knowledge partner today, which is Visa. Now, we have a fantastic panel of experts with us here today. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce the four people who I will be talking to. But we want to make sure that this is a conversation with you, our audience. We want to make it as interactive as possible. So whichever device you are kind of listening to this on, watching this on, there should be a Q&A button somewhere on your screen. You can use that Q&A button at any point from now on to message in your comments and your questions. Don't wait until the end of the conversation. Send in them as you think of them, and we will get through as many of those as we can before the end of today's webinar. Just a little bit in terms of the topic that we're going to be focusing on. So digital identities are one of the key building blocks for modern digitally enabled public service infrastructure. They create the potential for better joined up services for users and improve interactions with government. And although there are many countries that still don't have digital IDs, increasing numbers of governments around the world are developing systems that allow for simple and secure identification and authentication online. So today, some of the issues we're going to be talking about are how have governments developed those digital ID systems? How have they implemented them at scale? Some of the benefits that digital ID systems have brought to governments and to their citizens, and then looking at the issues around digital IDs and government payments, how that's helping to make them more seamless and more secure. So they're just some of the issues that we will be touching on. In terms of our fantastic speakers, we have Helen Ramat, who is the eID expert at the Information System Authority in Estonia. Always great to have Estonia with us when we're talking about anything digital. And for the past decade, Helen has worked in different public sector IT and e-governance software projects as a technical product manager and expert advisor, with a special focus on the area of electronic identity, specializing on technical implementation of eIDAS regulation in Estonia. Then we're going to head over to the Dominican Republic, and we're going to be talking to Cesar Molina Rodriguez, who is Director of Cybersecurity, E-commerce and digital signatures at the Dominican Institute of Telecommunications. He's got more than 20 years experience and has worked as coordinator of the working groups of the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise, and is more recently serving as regional director of the Latin America and the Caribbean Cyber Competence Center. Next, we'll be talking to Sviat Senyuta, who is the head of Visa Government Solutions for Central Europe, Middle East and Africa region, which covers 88 countries. Sviat's focus is to establish strategic relationships with governments and public sector organizations throughout the region as they digitize economies and deliver sustainable social impact, working with cross-functional teams from Visa and all of its partners. And then last, but by no means least, we've got Raphael Angius, who is a senior advisor at the Norwegian Directorate of Immigration, UDI, and is currently product manager for the Biometrics, Identity and Personal Data Development Team, and a member of UDI's Identity Expert Team. During the past 2 years, he's been product manager for ModPerson, which is a digital transformation project, which is a joint program of the Norwegian Directorate of Immigration, Police Service, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Immigration Appeals Board, and the Norwegian Tax Administration. So we might talk about how all of that collaboration is going when we hear from Raphael. So I'm sure you'll agree with me. We have a fantastic panel of speakers here, real experts. Please do take this opportunity to put your questions and your comments to our speakers. We want to make this a conversation with all of you in the audience. But I'm going to kick off that discussion by asking Helen. So, Helen, Estonia is known to be an exceptionally digital nation. So, can you just give us a quick kind of overview of what's the digital ID system like in Estonia, and what was its evolution? How did you get to where you are today?
Hello, everyone. Maybe it's good to start from a little historical background. So as much as you know, Estonia was the first country in the world where the identity ecosystem was implemented as a part of government national identity system. And Estonia's digital government has been broken down into two vital components that support the system of electronic identity and the surrounding ecosystem is the X-Road and the digital identity itself. And those two main components, like we call them cornerstones of our e-governance, work together to enable automation of business processes for the e-government. And as the X-Road and Estonia Smart Card services, the ID card-based services were released around the same time. They have worked together in harmony ever since. And with almost 1 billion queries on the X-Road each year, which are 95% already automated. About the digital identity part, banks were first who created a digital identification service, which was not based on the identity card or that type of technology first. So they provided the service that individuals could use to interact with the online banking system and filling and submitting tax income returns in the Estonian tax authorities' digital services. And then in 2002, the mandatory digital identity smart card was released. That is so-called Estonian national ID card. And but the preparations for the launch of the ID card started already in 1997, and the idea took off then in 2001 when Estonian banking sector and telecommunication companies founded the certification center that is the current and only one Estonian trust service provider for the ID card certificates. In the end of this year, starting from the end of this year, we will have the second trust service provider, but this is quite fresh news, so I'm not going to stop there for that long. And the very first digital document, the ID card, was issued on 28th of January 2002. That is a mandatory identity document provided by the government for the citizens who are aged between 15 and over, and is used for not only for electronic, but also for physical identification, and also a travel document by citizens that can travel within the Schengen European Union. Also, that card contains a chip which enables the card to be used digitally for authentication and digital signing based on the public key infrastructure we have. And yeah, basically the function of the certificate is to provide a binding relationship between the public key and the identity card, identity of the card holder. So it's the public key infrastructure. It's all based on. Yeah, going further, then later on there was mobile ID that was introduced in 2007. Then there was an additional digital identity token card introduced in 2010, which like replaced the digital the Estonian ID card digital use part, where where people wanted to keep separate their travel document, the physical identification document, and the digital use. Sometimes people start forgetting them into their card readers. So this was something that was led to this solution. And then ultimately, the latest technology of the eID we have is the private sector initiative provided Smart ID. It's an app-based electronic ID which was introduced in 2017, and the government decided to recognize this eID according to the EU legislation as a qualified signature creation device. So it reached to the highest level of security, or in legislation where it's the assurance level. So the difference between the Smart ID and Mobile ID is basically the gap of technology, and since they had this 10 years apart technology among each other, people started using their smartphones and data roaming services. It was able to be used in a specific environment where a lot of people already onboarded on the smartphones. But other than that, Mobile ID can also be used. Talking about the digital inclusion also is more convenient for the elderly people who still use the button phones, and it can be used as well there, since it's a SIM card based Mobile ID. And just another last word about this is also important to remark that since 2014, Estonia has expanded its digital inclusivity by offering the e-residency program and Estonian e-resident card. And this allows for global citizens to access Estonian digital services and participates in its digital economy, such as establishing a company in another country, not being present, signing documents here in the Estonian government offices. And yes, it's irrespective of their physical location or citizenship. And last but not least, maybe it's worth to mention that the major role at all in the total adoption and to reach to this high level of adoption in the digital ID, as we say, 99% of Estonian citizens have the electronic ID, or at least the ID card if they're not activated their digital certificates yet, was that the Single European Payment Area establishment in 2008, and in this in the course of this, in 2018, the EU set such low transaction limits for the authentication with passwords and code cards that it was no longer practical to continue with these authentication methods, and the more secure ones were considered to be more substantial, and also considering the cybersecurity change in Europe, the situation in the cyberspace.
Helen, thank you so much. Really great to have that kind of whistle-stop kind of history of the evolution of the ID system in Estonia. And as you say, starting with the banking sector and then moving through, I think that's a lot of countries find that. I think that tax systems is the first way in which they use their kind of ID systems, and then also that move from the smart card to the mobile ID system as well. That might be something that other countries have had the same kind of journey. I noticed Cesar there was waving. I think he's got one of the Estonian residency cards, as you said there. So before I hand over to Cesar, I was just saying, Helen, from what's happened in Estonia, would you say there are one or two key lessons that could be learnt for other countries if they're sort of earlier on in their journeys on their digital ID development?
Well, it's worth to take a look at the overall processes in the e-governance or in the government at all, and reuse what they already have, such as information or data used on paper can be easily transformed in electronic format, and also to keep the existing technology that has higher trust and security and assurance, and definitely not creating a parallel world where you can, while you can keep the regulations and procedures that work, reuse the data and trustworthy solutions, keep the processes, but perhaps eliminate the bottlenecks such as human interaction in processes, and empower automation as much as possible, even the decision making, and also to use microservices on a common platform such as X-Road. Also, having multiple, like in more the identity provision terms, having multiple trust service providers for the functioning of electronic identity is important to minimize the dependency and single point of failure risks in the electronic identity ecosystem. This is one of our, like, quite a while, but now we are reaching to another phase where we are mitigating this risk actually. And also governments should consider supporting and providing multiple eID tokens apart from the primary ones, as we have in Estonia, the identity card. And there are secondary ones that are relying on the primary ID cards that help you to, in case of you lose one of the ID tokens, or the certificates have been suspended for some reasons, or invalid, or the one of the identity means don't function anymore, or it fails, you already also have the other tokens to use, and it's important to keep the processes working this way.
Thanks, Helen. That's fantastic. So, Sejra, I'm going to come over to you there in terms of the evolution that Helen described, but also maybe some of those lessons learned about what you need in order to do this successfully. Is that something that's familiar to you in the Dominican Republic? How does that journey kind of translate to what you are experiencing?
Yeah, I thank you so much, Siobhan, and Helen. Thank you so much for that great overview. Well, obviously, good morning from here from Santo Domingo to all of the participants. And I like that we're going, from, this incredibly advanced digital nation, in Northern Europe, to all the way down to the Caribbean. And I'm going to try to bring it down a little bit to, as you mentioned, what it is that we have been doing. And obviously, for the Dominican Republic, the digital ID journey is relatively young when, compared to Estonia. I mean, Helen was just mentioning, in 2002, when they started, but back in 1997, but 2002, when all of this started coming together as a plan. And I remember 2002 is when we actually approved our initial law on that had some inklings more on digital signatures and digital ID at the time. But I guess it's the base that we have used to transform our ecosystem. So with that, to give you a very quick briefing, for the past 20 years, we there at Indotel, we have been trying to play a critical role in creating, an enabling environment, for the digital transformation of the country. And of course, this includes, the development of digital ID and trust services. So with that, one of the key elements that we have been trying to develop is obviously a robust and regulatory framework, that enhances, consumer trust, because at the end of the day, this is for the consumer. We want to be able to encourage innovation in government services. We want to be able to protect users' privacy, and eventually, get all of our governmental service, both governmental and private sector services, to become widely adopted. So one of the, we sort of, I guess, making a very, very long history short, we sort of stalled from probably around 2006 to 2015, when we started seeing the adoption of government services and some private sector services. But it wasn't until 2019 when actually we took a revolutionary step. We approved the regulation, it's Regulation 7119. Which basically standardized our national framework with that of the eIDAS regulation of the EU. So basically, we went a step and said, okay, we want to be able to have a framework that's harmonized with international best practices, and with the end goal of eventually being able to have, I guess, reciprocal possibility of having providers from the EU provide services here and providers from the Dominican Republic be able to provide services there. So the adoption of this regulatory model basically, in addition, obviously, of promoting this international interoperability, has allowed us elements, such as expanding the range of electronic trust services that we can offer, not only the creation of electronic signatures, qualified signatures, as Helen was mentioning, being able to have, this mutual recognition of trust providers, expand, the universe of service that we are able to offer here, including, such services such as validation and preservation services, qualified electronic delivery services, and so forth and so on. And lastly, and this is like the key element that's behind all of the efforts of the Dominican Republic's efforts in digital transformation, is increasing the competitiveness of our entities and our services. So behind all of this, behind our push for more privacy regulation, for more cybersecurity regulation, the idea is to increase competitiveness, because at the end of the day is what translates to the citizen, to the market, and so forth and so on. So to give you an example of that, and obviously I like the idea of the financial sector example that Helen put forth, and I probably know that my other colleagues here as well in the panel will touch a little bit upon this. So we came up we conceived with the Central Bank of the Dominican Republic a few years ago, basically regulation that would allow the use of digital documents and electronic signatures, specifically for financial transactions. So basically, what this framework did was laid the ground, for payment systems regulation, and it actually became a tool to support digital payments across the country and internationally. And this specifically, the target of this was specifically, financial sector services such as banking, insurance, factoring services, stock market companies, investment funds, and so forth and so on. So very, very clearly targeting that specific sector, being able to, mobilize the economy towards a more digital framework. And obviously, you mentioned, I guess, Estonia having this wonderful, great model, on the contrast, our digital ID model is still being built. So we do have the foundational components, we have a biometric ID card, that's run by our Central Electoral Board. However, unlike Estonia, where they have this fully integrated system, we're still, baby steps, getting there slowly, we're slowly developing. And I just want to make a very fun, but at least for me it's fun, anecdote about this, because this was due to an initiative that came actually out of Indotel and the Central Bank. And basically at the time, this was 2021, and we were trying to push the Electoral Board, which handles, civil registry and our ID, go to digital. Let's get a digital ID model up and running. And I guess they were still warming up to the idea. So we said, okay, forget about it. We're coming up with a model. Indotel as a regulator will define technical elements. Central Bank as financial regulator, will set up the financial elements and requirements, and we'll have this digital ID model only for the financial sector. And obviously, maybe this was the push that they actually needed, where they said, okay, so, we're getting a new ID card next year, so we will have definitely a card-based digital ID. As I favor, personally, I would favor a more, digital, go all digital, model, and not necessarily have a card-based model. However, given the comments that Helen mentioned, maybe, having more than one singular failure point, or having multiple tokens might not be such a bad idea, considering that we have quite a large population, and a very large population of that is may not have all of the digital capability to be able to hold a full-on digital ID on their phone or on their smartphone, so forth and so on. So yeah, this, I guess, we'll see how it ends up developing. And last but not least, I do want to make a reference that to some elements that Helen did remark regarding the wonderful interoperability platform that they have, X-Road. And yes, it works magnificently. And one of the key pending elements that we have here in the Dominican Republic is that we're trying to develop our own interoperability platform based on this Estonia model for X-Road, for not only for the government agencies, but also for businesses and citizens to be able to profit from that. And the last element that I do want to highlight on that is that the other two key points that right now we are developing as well is obviously trying to streamline as much government digital services as possible. That eventually, might help, create or build confidence, among citizens, among institutions, in the regular use of digital IDs. And obviously, we can't talk about this without referencing, both, the elephants in the room, which is cybersecurity and data protection. We can go all digital, we can do all of this, and it's all magnificent. But if we don't have, those data protection regulations or standards set in place, then, we're going to be hot water. And obviously, cybersecurity, it is a key concern for anyone who's thinking about doing anything digital. So this, again, is also one element that you should never take for granted.
Lisa, thank you so much. Again, really interesting to get a perspective from a different country. As you say, some things kind of mirroring what you've seen in Estonia, but obviously each country has its own challenges. So each country has its own context in which they're developing. Interesting that you said some of the step changes, some of the foundational things for you were around the regulations, bringing in that was the regulations that were kind of recognized across the EU. So the importance of the kind of international regulation, really important for you. Establishing trust, you say, very important for the consumer. And you came back to that, making sure the privacy, the cyber issues are fully addressed, and having that robust regulatory kind of environment in place. But also I was really interested what you said in that, again, Helen, you said yours started with the banking sector, and Cesar, you're saying where it's most used at the moment is in the financial sector. And you mentioned there using these digital IDs to give access to finance, essentially, to people, so banking to insurance, to help mobilize the economy and stimulate growth. So certainly I think for a lot of countries, that's probably their experience, especially when they're earlier on in their development of these cards. And I think that's a good place for me to come over to you, Sviat, as well. So I guess because with Visa, you're involved in this with so many different countries, I think, around the world in the development of their kind of ID systems. What are you seeing are the biggest benefits when countries get this right, both to the government, but also to the citizens? And is it to do with that kind of access to finance?
Thank you for the question. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I think that when we are talking about digital ID, we need to understand that this is the cornerstone of digital economy, right? As well as digital payments. And when we are looking at multiple countries today, I can tell that roughly most of the countries in the world, if not almost all, are looking into, some are building already, some are looking into building digital ID ecosystems. But the reality is, when we are talking about those categories, the most important elements there are access with trust and security. And when we are talking about access, it's about how we are empowering people to have access to digital services, how to have access to financial services. And, Visa's mission is to uplift everyone everywhere, so that no one is left behind. Therefore, when I'm talking about my region, specifically about Central Europe, Middle East, and Africa, very diverse, but most of the countries, I would say 95% of the countries are now looking into building those digital government ecosystems. And when we are looking, somebody may be using terminology like the digital public infrastructure, etc. But when we are looking at those elements, what is critical, what is driving the biggest synergy there is three elements, effectively, which are driving the access. So the first one is, of course, digital ID is the cornerstone, because you need to identify and be able to verify people, right? This is very important. The second one is digital payments. How people, because usually the interaction is in many instances, the services are paid and people need to move money, right? The reality is, and the government needs to move money as well. We will be talking about it a bit later. So the third element is digital public services, the access to be able to interact with government in a fully online mode. So when we are combining those three elements together in a user-friendly manner, of course, we are talking about the concept of a so-called government super application, which in effect is a digital government in a smartphone, because of course most of the countries, if not all, are moving into digital first, mobile first. This is the best way on how people can interact with the government 24/7 and be able to have this interaction in a fully digital way. Digital ID, of course, is the cornerstone. Therefore, Visa facilitates rollouts of those digital ID ecosystems, helping governments to go through this digital transformation journeys. But also, we are looking at how to close the gap, this digital divide, and in terms, and especially financial inclusion. If you in some parts of the world, it's really a big challenge. Of course, if you're looking at countries like Estonia, like as many Scandinavian countries, their levels of financial inclusion are really great, amazing. But there are lots of countries in the world still today where people are excluded, not only from financial sector, but also they just simply do not have IDs. Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, they don't have IDs, right? That's a very big challenge because lots of people are excluded from being able to interact with the government, to be able to conduct business. There is no economic empowerment of those people, and this creates a huge challenge for the economy because at the end it impacts significantly GDP. People do not have credit scores. Usage of all quasi-financial, I would say, or cash or quasi-financial instruments is again feeding more gray and black economy and creates more risks, right? And again, when we are looking how governments can benefit from it, when we are looking at digital ID, well, first of all, the government will know like what about the population. It's very important from security points of view. It's very important about ability of the government to deliver a government program.
Mhm.
Because we know that we are living in an interesting age where emergency situations like flood, droughts are happening more and more often. And lots of governments, we have seen it in practice, are struggling to deliver support to people. So when the flood was happening in Pakistan, for example, several years ago, lots of people, thousands of people were suffering. The government was struggling on how to bring the financial aid to population. The same in many countries in Africa. Last summer, there was significant droughts happening, and the governments were really struggling on how to bring the support to people. Therefore, when we were looking at those digital government ecosystems, so in addition to ID, you need to also have an ecosystem of government wallets. Sometimes they're called social wallets, which are effectively integrated with the digital ID, and the level of integration may be as well very different. But in a nutshell, when we are talking about it, the government can build out this ecosystem and be able to first deliver any government program in a very quick manner. So if there is droughts, they know which people are living on a specific territory. They do understand what type of support they need to provide, but it's kind of, this is one thing, but also financial support. Today, there are quite a few solutions being built out on predictive understanding, leveraging AI on emergencies which may be happening, and the governments may even provide financial support even before the emergency, so that people can get ready for the emergency happening. And of course, the government leveraging those government payment wallets, which are in addition to the government ID wallets, let's call it, they can make those, we call it programmable disbursements, where the government can provide liquidity to support people or incentivize people for something in a very programmable way, meaning that they can control how people are using the government's money, effectively, social support, social aid, emergency, etc. So this concept of government super app is gaining big traction. Also, what is important to understand that it gives governments not only possibility to be very efficiently delivering their promises to the population, but also to have data and visibility. What is happening, how to create better regulations for people. So it's very important because now the government is driven by data. So the more data, the more knowledge you have, the better public policies you will be able to produce. And we are helping to build those ecosystems, of course, preserving all the national sovereignty principles, preserving security and trust principles. This is very important. And this helps to close lots of gaps. I had quite a few very interesting conversations with on multiple fronts. So I remember a very great conversation with one of the leading agro techs in Africa, and they told me, you know, that we would be able to grow our business much faster, but many of the farmers do not have IDs. If you look at the African continental free trade area, right? One of the main challenges is to develop the volumes of intra-African trade is lack of IDs. Lack of IDs means you are not able to access financial services. If you're not able to access financial services and to have a proper bank account, you cannot build your credit score. If you cannot build your credit score, you will not be able to build your profile and receive cheaper loans to grow your business. So all these elements are very tightly interconnected. So Visa's task, right, is to help governments to go through this transformation in a very, I would say, in a more sophisticated way. Today, many governments are even challenging if we need, when we are going into digital ID, also to have plastic or paper. There are a few countries, like for example, Ethiopia, they decided we will not be printing plastic IDs because that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And we are going to go from non-biometric, just regional paper-based IDs. By the way, according to one of the reports, 50% of them were faked. But they immediately, so it was a critical task for the government to resolve this. And they did it in an amazing manner. They have wonderful people in the government. So they immediately went to a digital ID, and they're very successfully rolling this out. And I mean, Ethiopia, I think, is one of the brightest examples. Sometimes, you know, countries are moving in quite an interesting manner. Democratic Republic of Congo, though they do not have foundational ID, the Ministry of Health was driving a program on how to support pregnant women, people who require treatment, etc. That was a lot driven by payments. However, they have created a functional ID, so to say, a health ID, which is also perfectly possible, targeting 70 million people in the country to be able to be identified, verified in the hospitals, etc., and many other institutions, but also to be able to receive the support from the government. So combining all these elements, I think that digital ID, digital payments, digital public services, this combination in one sophisticated ecosystem, which today may be also very efficiently powered by generative and agentic AI, is a new way people is in fact demonstrating the new era of digital government in the world. And I think that will be really changing the way people live and interact. Today, I'm Ukrainian, and I had amazing opportunity to interact with the DIA, which is a government super app in Ukraine. I don't remember at least even one case when I was living in Ukraine, my daily life, and I was carrying on my paper plastic ID documents. I was boarding plane, train, using notary services, because digital ID is not only about single sign-on into digital assets. It's all about how you interact anywhere in the country with any type of government or commercial institutions in a fully digital way. And it's working perfectly well. And of course, Estonian example is an amazing one. They are pioneering. So kudos to Estonia. Amazing, amazing cases.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, really interesting to hear about how Visa is working in so many different ways with so many different countries on this. Lots of issues there. We've got some questions coming in, so please do. Well, after we've heard from Raphael, I'm going to come over to all of you in the audience. But interesting, as you set out there, those three cornerstones, as you said, the digital ID, digital payments, digital public services. So really emphasizing there. And I think this builds on what Helen and Cesar said, that government has to play its part here in creating that enabling kind of environment and putting those building blocks in place, just stressing the importance of IDs to improve financial inclusion, which again is a benefit to the government. You get more people active in the economy, but also things like, as you say, bringing in, it helps if the government can give support very quickly to their citizens in emergency situations, and even looking ahead maybe to the use of AI to preempt some of that and actually give support even before it's actually needed. And then stressing the importance there of data. You get so much data from these systems, which can help insights that drive better policy making. Thank you so much. And you ended there with kind of looking ahead to the era, you know, governments that are doing this well, where it helps. So Raphael, I'm going to come over to you in Norway. Does Norway feel like it's doing this really well? I wonder if you could give us a sense both of what's going on in Norway generally, but then you work in a very specific policy area. So to what extent digital identification is helping there in that area of immigration as well?
Look, it's I think I love being number 4 because it actually challenged me to think about this interaction in a completely different manner. Now I have to improvise. I actually have to thank my colleagues that have touched upon so many of the things that I wanted to say, which are, you know, infrastructure, architecture, the quality of data, and actually how much eID can help in emergency situations. I mean, all these things are things that are very, very similar for. I mean, all the things that have been said up till now are very, very much the same things I would have said in my introduction. So let me start with something different. You asked me how Norway is doing, and I do have here printed copy of the national eID strategy. If you can see it, well, you can't because I have a blur. Anyway, we have a new national strategy for eID in Norway, and it's from 2023. The previous one was from 2008. So just let me give you a very short introduction about what these documents are and why they are important. These are documents at a very high level, and they set just a few guidelines. They describe the status of eID, and they give a few guidelines that are going to guide the development of the sector in the future. The one from 2008 started from a very easy assumption. Our financial sector had been working on their authentication solutions for identification for a long time. So they were widely used in the population. And I remember, I'm Italian, right? I'm Italian, naturalized Norwegian. So when I came here in 2006, when I was asked, how is Norway? Well, the first answer was cold, and the second answer was always fair. You know, it's easy. What did I mean with that? It was kind of easy doing stuff. You know, getting a contract for telephone, getting a contract for electricity. It was easy setting up a bank account. And that was very much because of course, good public services, yes, but also a very high level of integration between public service and private sector, and a private sector that doesn't over-bureaucratize itself like it is usually done in Italy. Like when there are no rules, they make their own rules, so it's it's even more difficult to actually do stuff. And of course, that's growth impairing. But the 2008 strategy came in that particular environment in which there were several commercial EID solutions that enabled people like me, newly arrived students, to just start living in a normal way. Fast forward to 2025, we are in a completely different setting right now. In 2012, the ID port, which is the common component that enables all sorts of digital IDs to interact with government services that use ID port. It's so like about 20,000 transactions. And now we are over in 300,000. No, sorry, 300 million. It was I'm making a business. I have the numbers here. Now we had 8,000. We had 200 public services in the ID port in 2012, and now we have 8,000 and growing in nowadays. And the transactions, they have had a very high growth, up to 300 million per year. This is the amount of logins as of now. So if you live in Norway now and you have an EID, which you most probably have, you will be able to access all sorts of public services and pretty much any private service that is large enough. But like large enough means like small massage parlor just right beside where I live, or even the little shop. They can offer some kind of level of digital identification, which is of course very convenient. The strategy of 2023, which is the one that I have in front of me, it sets a couple of goals that I think are very important. We can mention them right now because they are the guidance that we have for the future development of the EID sector in Norway. So goal number one is that all user groups will easily get access to EID with the security level that they need. Now, I imagine that Sviatoslav, when I say these, will giggle a little bit, because this is like very much what you mentioned before: access, right security level, and inclusion, and ease of use, of course. The second goal is that the solutions for logging in, for the use of public digital systems, will have to be, of course, again, secure, cost-effective, and holistic. And that's very interesting, because that's very much, and we're going to talk about this. I don't want to get into the details right now, but holistic means that you can have public agencies and public instances that talk with each other, and that may design services that are not silo-based, and that and actually can, flow into each other. So if you have the need to file a job application and identify yourself and set up a bank account, you can do that maybe in one single flow, which is very convenient. And we have some experience with this kind of approach that have given us very high gains when it comes to return of investment, and that's just the design part. So then the third goal is that we will need to have framework for sure and effective solutions. So again, it's more or less the same, but now we're talking about the framework. And this framework needs to be given. So what does it mean? Regulation, of course. Fourth goal is that these solutions need to be on pace with the development of technology and market. So they need to be future-proof. And lastly, we need to be cost-effective and good interoperability across all the systems and sectors and levels of public administration. So now this is the strategy. Now when it comes to the status in Norway, I can say that we're basically in a situation that can be similar to the one of Estonia, so that I need to repeat very much what kind of landscape we have. We have several private developers. We have one login solution for all of the public sector administration, so that they don't need to go and make their own. And that is that's probably a very good way to start. We have some very few central components that are common for everybody, and then the rest is just okay. Do your game, free flow, and try your luck and make your services, and that's I think that's working pretty well.
And Raphael, I'm just conscious because we're getting a lot of questions in. We're getting some questions in. I want to make sure we have time for those. But you've set out the strategy, and on immigration in particular, is that now proving beneficial in terms of changes to the immigration system, having an ID?
Well, okay, yeah. When the strategy that I just mentioned is the national one, so it actually is important for all the sectors. But when it comes to immigration sector, since we have a good starting point, which is the infrastructure, and I didn't mention the major enabler for this situation, which is a national registry of residents and citizens, of which Mod Person, the project you started, delivered the last bit, which is the National Registry of Foreign Nationals. Having a national register, central national registry, enables us to have good data and to have a single provider of data on personal data. So having this situation, we started to, well, basically play. And we are playing with different sorts of things. We're playing with RPA, we're playing with automation, we are playing with wallets as well. We have already rolled out a wallet in cooperation with the University of Oslo, with the Municipality of Oslo, and with the business region of the city, and of course us and the tax administration. And this wallet has been in use already, and it's in a pilot project that has proved extremely efficient, cutting down waiting times for skilled workers from 37 days to 3.
Wow.
And that's just one of the things that we're doing. When it comes to automation, you have a digital ID and you're a Nordic citizen, you can go into a fully automated track, which means that if you apply for citizenship, you can get it in actually as fast as 2 hours.
Wow.
From the moment of application, down from 2 years.
Yeah.
That it was before.
Wow,
and that's just mind-boggling, you know.
Raphael, thank you. So, I mean, I've just had successfully got my French citizenship, and that took me nearly 2 years. So had it been 2 hours, I'd have been very, very happy to have that. But really impressive to hear some of the benefits in one particular policy area. And you can see that if that is kind of amplified across governments, you can see the benefits of some of these systems. And as you say there,
Ukrainian citizen in the panel, I can mention that collective protection for Ukrainian has also been automated in a very large degree. And we have like 30,000, 36,000 applications fully automated each year, which means that for this group of people, the procedure is not taxing and it's very convenient, and they can start working and be part of a immediately. We should support refugees means a lot. So we'll
Yeah.
see how to extend it to other groups as well in the future.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you to all of you for those opening remarks. I think some common things coming out in terms of kind of how this is not just about the digital IDs, this is about digital transformation and that delivery of smooth services, and how the ID system is one crucial part of that. I'd be interested if we have people in the audience from countries that don't have a digital ID scheme or don't seem to have plans for a digital ID scheme. Do they think that is going to hinder the development of that digitalization kind of journey? But also a couple of other things that have come out, the importance of the relationship between the private sector as a partner in this, the private sector and the public sector working together, that creating that ecosystem, and the role of the government in creating that kind of digital infrastructure that's needed as well. And then other issues that came up: security, trust, data privacy, those issues really important. And I want to come on to one of the questions on that note that have come in. So Dilu Sultana has said, how have you addressed the unique needs and challenges of the elderly population in the implementation of digital ID systems? And I like this question because, Sofia, I'm going to come to you first on this, because you talked about IDs being helping to include people, you know, financial inclusion. But is there a risk we are digitally excluding people as we become more and more digital as well?
So I can bring a few examples, right? So again, from my native country, there were lots of discussions, right? And Visa is a strategic partner to Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. There were lots of discussions around, okay, what we will be doing with elderly people maybe who lack some digital skills, etc. So DS scaled up really very fast. Today they are 23 million. That's the latest figure, maybe more already. The reality is that when you look at the percentage of the population which is using this government super app, 25% of those people are 55 years plus. 25. It's a huge number. It's a huge number. When we are, on the other notes, when we are designing digital government ecosystems for the country, we need to understand kind of all the programs. Many of the social support programs, etc., right? They're linked specifically for vulnerable parts of the population. And we do understand, you know, you need to understand the country, context, etc. But each and every use case and each and every program has its certain flow in a way that it addresses the needs of elderly people, vulnerable people, disabled people, etc. So, of course, it's very nuanced work, right? Sometimes you need to address the matter leveraging USSD components, right? And like in many countries in Africa. And by the way, one of the very important things I wanted to say about quite a few countries still in the world, due to lack of internet, mobile internet coverage in some of the countries, some countries, it's really a very big challenge. We need to design and help the governments to design digital ID, which can be used offline. Right? Because like in some countries, large chunks of the territories do not have internet access. And this is very important when our task, when we are fulfilling as Visa, our mission on uplifting everyone everywhere so that no one is left behind, right? We need to consider each and every citizen of the country. And this is, by the way, very much aligning with the objectives of the government. So we are bringing right technology to the right context, which will be able to encompass all those problems that the government faces as of today. Right.
Thanks, Matt. Helen, I'm going to ask you the same question around digital exclusion, because you did mention in your opening remarks that, am I right in thinking the e-smart card that was brought in became mandatory? So it was mandatory. So how did you deal with people who, like, was there a pushback on that, especially from older people? And you said there's now 99% of people that are using digital ID. So how have you managed to achieve that?
Actually, this 99, the gap in the 99% to 100% is actually the minors we are talking about here. Estonian ID can be issued at any age. There's no restrictions compared to some other countries in terms of digital inclusion. So basically, a parent can issue the ID card for their newborn and even behalf of them activate the certificates for digital use. But it is not mandatory until the age of 15. So this 1% basically reflects the people, the population in the age of 0 till the age of 14, 15. So it is not mandatory, and in some cases it is voluntarily possible, but not so many people use it before they go to start using the e-school platforms, for example. It's widely used in Estonia, for example, in the primary schools as well. But not everyone necessarily at a certain age need to take advantage of that system.
But in terms of older people then, was there any consideration, any pushback? You know, what was the kind of reaction from the older population?
Since I haven't been working for 20 years in the industry, I'm quite, I started in 2016 working in the Estonian Information System Authority, but knowing a little about the background, the uptake was quite fast due to all those influences from the regulations, the SEPA payment system, all those influences triggered people to use other means, and that kind of pushed them to adopt the new technology. But of course, Estonia with this Tiger Leap program had also focused a lot since the beginning of 90s to educate people on the use of internet and electronic tools. This has been like a big part of on educating people in all sort of demographic groups. So this is what we have been focused on as well today, trying to raise the knowledge how to update a certain ID software that is necessary, or even how to behave securely in a public sector services, or in generally in the digital space where you use digital services, whether it's banking or private or government-based services.
Thanks. And Cesar, is that an area then, as Helen was saying, they've been focusing quite a lot on education around kind of the internet for many, many years. Is that a difference, maybe one of those kind of differences between countries? Would you say there are issues around digitalization and vulnerable groups, including the elderly, in Dominican Republic?
I guess on that part, I want to circle back. I think it was Rafael who made that comment on, if we're targeting, X, Y, or Z group, or et cetera, you need to make it as at least as simplified and user-friendly as possible. And if we're considering the elderly in particular, I would say, you need to, make it very intuitive. You need to have, large fonts that they can actually, being able to read, have a simplified navigation menu, or have at least minimal steps that they are able to follow. One issue that at least for us has helped us here, and this circles back also to what's mentioning, having limited internet connectivity. For example, we right now, because Indetel also has the mission of getting, broadband and mobile services out. One of the things that we've encountered in, trying to, push more technology out to, underserved communities is, being able to, as you mentioned, doing capacity building, organizing, regular community-based, training workshops that, that not only focus on, on that specific community, but on the different groups, get, sometimes, grandpa, as someone who has very elderly parents and who has to deal with giving them, tech support for all sorts of things. I can definitely say that having, the younger generation trained to help the older generation, sometimes is not, is not a bad way of going about it. But also, you may also want to, target or at least target or create methods, such as having, maybe some sort of personalized support or offline support system, like having small kiosks
Right.
I guess in the city hall of this community, or in a shopping mall, or so forth and so on, as a way to try if someone needs help with a specific topic related not only to digital ID, but I guess digital subjects in general, that they might be able to go there and get the assistance that they need.
Exactly. And that's interesting. I think in India it is that a grandparent can give their grandchildren, I think, permission to access the digital ID on their behalf and help them through that process. So it's similar to what you're saying there. Raphael, we do have another question to get to, but anything you want to add on digital exclusion and the risk of digital exclusion?
Absolutely. I can add that we have a huge gap, and that it's very difficult to fill it in. I can say that 14% of the population in Norway, 600,000 people, actually is deemed to be lowly digital, or with some sort of digital obstacle. And it encompasses the elderly, people with some handicaps, and it can be it's a kind of broad definition. Have the ones that are these are the ones that are over 16 years old. Then you have the ones that are under 16 years old. And there, again, you have to be a group that cannot have digital ID in a form that is implemented right at the present moment. And then you have those that cannot have a bank account, and that don't want to have a bank account. So when we use market-based solutions, commercial solutions, then we might have that issue as well. So right now, the challenge is to study and find the different challenges that are presented by the situation, address them. And actually, we are very lucky. We have especially one professor of law, which is very active in the field. She got the Legal Certainty Prize last year. And I've heard it in several settings, and she's very engaged and very good at getting all these issues in the under plain sunlight. And so she's leading a group which is called SODI, Legal Certainty and Digital Identities. That's the main task. So hopefully, I see that there has been a change, a paradigm change in the High Court. The Supreme Court has ruled that responsibility for the misuse of digital identity is shared.
Right.
So it's not only the user that is responsible for digital identity being misused, but it's also banking institution that has, or the private institution, or the public institution that has issued that ID. So that's, of course, that provides an incentive to give better solutions that actually are give us some sort of protection, or a better, for instance, a better easily administered guardian.
Well, that brings us on nicely to the final question, I think, which is coming from Ian Norton. And I think, Svea, I think this came in while you were speaking, so I'm going to come to you first. And Ian has said, the African models of creating digital ID are interesting, but raise questions about what they use as the foundational identity to confirm the user creating the digital ID. How do you guarantee that this is a genuine person, that the identity details and biometrics are in control of the genuine user? I want to broaden this a little bit, because it's going to be my final question to all of you, which is, how can you give that reassurance to people that these ID systems are secure, that they can't be easily, their identity can't be easily taken by somebody else, and that their kind of data is going to be held securely? So one, that their digital ID couldn't be hacked and used by somebody else, but also that government will keep that data that these generate secure. Svea, I'll come to you.
Thank you. That's a really good question, and I think that the answer to this is very simple. So any functionality as well, right, it will be built within the government. So in the specific case I was showcasing, that was Ministry of Health, right? And the way the biometric data is being captured is in the same way like a foundational ID. Usually what is happening, the foundational ID are being leveraged by ministries of Interior or Home Affairs, right? However, given the certain challenges sometimes in some of the markets, in some of the countries, right? The process with the foundational ID is going slower. And many other ministries want to go through the digitization faster, but they are doing this with the same level of very high standard, with the same levels of security, etc., like a foundational ID. However, they need to call it legally, I would say, a functional ID to accommodate access of people to digital services in a certain area, right? It may be also an agro ID if it will be driven by Ministry of Agriculture, etc., etc. So talking about this specific case, I think that if the country has a challenge, right, with the foundational ID, whether it's not working or it's not in place, other parts of the governments can accommodate the like similar projects in parallel, right? Capturing the face biometrics, iris occasionally for very large countries, and in the same way. And it helps to bring people faster, right? So there is no compromise on security, no compromise on trust in this ecosystem. However, just the flavor is functional because it serves a specific need.
Yeah. Thanks, Jan. Cesar, I'll come to you. Your thoughts on how do you reassure your populations that these systems are secure?
Well, obviously, how do I reassure them that they're secure? This is just, it's, where do I start? Okay, so basically, part of our role there at Indetel is trying to promote, the secure services. So one of the things that we try to do is obviously, do it either through education, public awareness campaigns, capacity building, and obviously having, I guess, as more of a transparent governance model as possible. So basically, the citizens, when they use digital IDs, when they use trust services, they understand not only the benefits, they also understand, what their rights might be, regarding to certain service or not, what their responsibilities may be, when using a digital ID or an electronic trust services. So one of the things that I do want to highlight is that sort of what we've tried to do, and this I'll go back to the beginning of my presentation was an element that I did forget to highlight is that, for example, for us, the element of it's not only just for, national, we've heard a lot about the Estonian model, how Estonia does all of the wonderful things that they do. So we said, you know what, we want to create, our own model, and maybe we do want to be, our own little Estonia in a Caribbean way with warmer weather, probably. And what we basically are trying to do now is having our model, harmonized with our other partners here in the region. So working on international cooperation and best practices that, that touch upon, being able to, recognize, our model with other countries. We started doing this with Uruguay very recently as a way to open the door to the Southern Cone, with Ecuador as well for the Andean region, and for Central America, which is our strategic trade partner. So with that, obviously, we get a more harmonized model at a regional level, but also at the same time, we're able to promote the things that we have been doing in a more strategic manner. So, going back to the original question, how do we get more public acceptance? How do we create this trust? Then we do it that way. First of all, we create all of the necessary elements at a national level, and then we try to broaden our scope to an international level so that other countries may see some of the steps that we've taken, try to follow up on that model, and eventually create a harmonized framework that will benefit, the region in the long term.
Thanks. So not just Dominican Republic, the region can benefit as well. Raphael and then Helen, I'm going to come to you for final thoughts, but we've got 2 minutes left, so it's going to have to be a very short answer. But just as you're the two most developed countries and the furthest along, I get a simple answer going back to Ian's is how safe is your system, and do people need to be worried that maybe their digital IDs could be used by somebody else? I'm going to put it like that way. Raphael, 30 seconds from you and then 30 seconds from Helen. How safe are your systems?
Of course, they're safe. And the answer to the second question, of course, you have to be digitally wise and aware, and you have to be very, very careful with how you share your information. You shouldn't do that. That's basically the answer.
Thanks, Rafa. So all of the usual, you need to be careful as well about how you're doing this. And then Helen, over to you for the final words.
I would comment maybe from the technical and standardization point of view that we are using and our identity is based on the very mature standards, and everything new that is coming we are taking it very carefully, monitoring it, analyzing it until we are sure that for example bringing the enrollment processes to the remote way, like doing remote identity proofing for the ID documents enrollment, which is kind of connects with the previous topic with the digital inclusion for disabled people or accessibility needs. It is important to emphasize this.
Yeah, brilliant. So the technology and the testing really important as well in all of this.
And just because our society and digital society is based on initial trust, and since also the social, political, cultural backgrounds together merged in the way the trust is today, we have a very high level of trust from the citizens, and this is it even more develops over time, and this may be the convenience in the digital use of services that made it even more important for people to understand the transparency, and at the same time providing the convenience, which is even also bringing the uptake higher.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Helen, that's a really good point to end on, because what we didn't get into, I think, is why some countries are managing to do this when some aren't. And I think that issue around levels of trust in your government might have something to do with that as well, because there are a surprising number of very developed countries, I think, that are struggling to get an ID scheme up and running. And I think that might be something to do with trust as well. Maybe that's for our next conversation on all of this.
There's a lot to talk about it more, and if we have it, we'll do that.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the audience for sending in your questions, but a big thank you to me in particular, to Sviat, to Helen, to Cesar, and to Raphael. Thank you so much for lending us all of your time and giving us so much of your expertise. A really interesting conversation there. Thanks to Visa for being our knowledge partners today. And I can see that we have shared with everyone who was in the audience today a white paper that Visa have done on digital ID. So please do take a look at that. To everyone who registered today, who was listening or who couldn't join live, just to say we've sent you a quick a small questionnaire. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes just to fill that in and send it back to us, it means we keep giving you the webinars on topics that are of most use to you. So I'd be really grateful if you could do that. We will be sending out a link to today's conversation with the video and the audio. You can watch it all again, you can share it with your colleagues, and we'll also be doing a write-up with some of the key points that came out of today's conversation. But it just leaves me to say, wherever you are, enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you again to our panel, and I hope we see you again on one of our webinars very soon. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.